she's the head honcho at the library.
Head honcho. I do adult programming services.
Okay. My wife was the head at the Toma Library. Toma High School. She was the head barbarian. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we are so excited to have Larry here to talk about his wonderful books, in particular the County School Days. So I will just give it over to him.
Well, thank you, Maggie. Thank you for being here. Didn't know how many would show up on this rather cold day, below zero, wind chill and so forth. And this is Country School Days, True Tales of Wisconsin One Room School. We sell the book for $12. We also have other books back there that you can look at there. I just brought one of each. They're science books. And $12, but on Wednesdays, we have a special 2 for $24. There's Wisconsin, right there, and Crawford County. Crawford County was I grew up. My favorite sister, Diane, her husband, Owen Ducharme are here, up from Seneca. They live right outside of Seneca on an estate down there. And this is Wisconsin. So in 1673, Father Marquette and Jean Nicolay, they left Mackinac up there. They traveled up the Fox River, portaged into the Wisconsin, into the Mississippi, and they went down as far right here. They saw markings that the Indians had from Spain. So they thought rather than being kidnapped, they would retreat back up here, back up to Illinois River, back up to Mackinac. So there is the marker at Wyalusing State Park, where on June 17th, 1673, 100 years before our nation was a nation, they went down the Mississippi. So it's not surprising that the first schools in Wisconsin should be at Green Bay and Prairie du Chien. That's the ends of the spectrum there, if you will. So the goals have not changed since colonial days, over 200, almost 300 years. It was to provide a good education in 3 R's, to show citizenship, good morals, ethics, and the requirements for the workplace. They still are the goals today. And you can often see one-room schools like this. Sometimes they have a balcony here with a bell, but almost always they have 3 windows on each side because many of them didn't have electricity until the 1940s. And the interior looks very much from school to school, very much alike. Many of the early furnishings were almost all handmade. There's the farm where I grew up outside of Seneca, and the farmhouse, the Ramblings farmhouse there, and the farm buildings, which are now all gone. So Wisconsin became a leader. And as a matter of fact, in the Treaty of Paris, where the United States got their liberty from England, 1783, the English, they said, we want those territories, they called them Northwest Territories, we want those for us. John Jay said, no, don't. They became the Northwest Territories of Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And then a few years later in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, they did 2 things. One is they prohibited slavery in those 5, which would become 5 states. And they said that every township will set aside 1 section of land for the publication, for the public schools. And a section of land, is 640 acres. So those monies were going to, when we sold those lands, to public schools. Now, Horace Mann, he was a big shot in education. He was from Massachusetts. And he said that every child in America should have an education free, financed by taxation, and it should be good enough for the best and cheap enough for the rest. And then another one, Henry Barnard, he was from Connecticut. He came to the legislature in Wisconsin as Wisconsin was being formed, and he was very influential in convincing legislatures to provide funds for public education. So there's the Oak Grove School that I attended from 1948 to 1956, a painting done of the school. The school is no longer there, an outhouse here for the girls and one on the other side there for the boys. So here is Crawford County. The spine of Crawford County right here is Highway 27, and then the Mississippi right here, the Wisconsin River right here, and the Kickapoo, quickest river in the world, right there. The school I attended was right here, Oak Grove School, right on Oak Grove Ridge there. So here's a little bit about Oak Grove School. And a little bit more. Now, to have a cistern was unique because if you read the accounts of many of the one-room schools, they had to go to a farm to get water, sometimes in big gallon pails, or they had to go to a stream. But our school sat sort of on a hill. There was no nearby places where they could do that. So they put in a cistern 10 feet deep, 4 feet wide, concrete, and then they would come and fill it with water. They have a trailer with a cow tank on full of water, and they fill it several times a year. The old stove there. We had one for my first 3 grades at Oak Grove. And matter of fact, there was our hot lunch program. About 11 in the morning, somebody would get a pan of water and set it up on top of there. 11:30, each kid would take a little jar of soup in the wintertime, they'd put it in there. And by 12 o'clock noon, that would be their hot lunch. And it went quite well, except once in a while, the kid didn't loosen the cap on the jar, the pressure would build up and you had an explosion. Great excitement. Some schools had the National, which could take 30-inch logs or 30-inch pieces of wood. And every one country school had to have your Lincoln and your Washington and a place to get water. We had a Blue Crown 5-gallon water cooler like this that had to be filled when we did chores. Everybody had chores at the last 10 minutes of school. And ours had a little spigot up here, so when you push that button, you got a little flare of water there that you could drink. We call it the bubbler. And the teacher's desk. Many of those schools were very plain, like this one, or this one. Some desks were 2 by 2. They had two by side. Some of them were just a single desk. And in our school, the first graders sat over there. And as you progress up the grades, you got the bigger desk over on this side here. You have the map case. And the teacher had a resources. She could go to either Lattice, which was out of Cedar Falls, Iowa, or she could go to Eau Claire Book and Stationery. And Lattice was a favorite. Matter of fact, here is the Lattice book right here, catalog 378 pages. And the last 78 pages were supplies. The first pages, 200 and some, were materials that the teacher could use. Here's a sheet out of the supplies. You could get school paste here, and you could get a dozen of those, which were a pint there, for $2.40. Of course, some kids like to eat that stuff because it tasted pretty good. Brushes, a dozen of them for 10 cents. She could order books. When I say she, because most of the elementary school teachers were female. Books were almost always under $1. Here's some favorites right here. And they were full-size hardcover books. Our library at Oak Grove had a minimum of maybe 40 books and maybe a maximum of 80 or 90 books. You know, spot out the entire library. She could cut out these right here, run it off a mimeograph machine, and with fasteners, they had movable parts. They had all kinds of things for to run off. The student could run off every month of the year, and they could put their own numbers in there. The hectograph machine, you could buy one, but most teachers made their own. They used Knox gelatin, Knox glycerol, and they put it in a pan. They heated it. They poured it in any kind of a pan like this. And then you can run off sheet after sheet after sheet, 30 or 40 at a time. Use the special ink pen or with aniline in it or a paper. She could buy one of these, $25, but most elementary schools couldn't afford that. The entire budget for Oak Grove 1 year would be like $48. And I did most of that research by going down to Platteville, where they had all of the records from Oak Grove School there. She had all the information about punctuation, the entire Constitution, the Robert's Rules of Order, and so forth. So she could use those as a review and actually give those to students. Remember the flashcards? Yes, flashcards with the division and all the words and numbers. She could buy a globe. A globe would cost $13. And many times it would be hanging globe with a counterweight over here, see? So you lift up this weight right here and the globe would go down, the kids would gather around it and they could study the globe there. It gave a proof to us as kids that the world was round, although it looked flat from the Scheckel farmstead there. She had magazines, the weekly readers. I really enjoyed those. They came on Friday, we could take them home. And there was a little magazine, a newspaper for kids. I remember when I was a little boy, my brother Philip and I would look that over, and when we were reading about 1949 about Quemoy and Matsu. The communists were shelling those little islands. They had driven Chiang Kai-shek off into Taiwan or Formosa. Some schools had a record player. This was no electricity. You wound it up, spring wound right here. And it gave you enough sound that you didn't need an amplifier. We didn't have one of those. Oak Grove couldn't afford it. So how were teachers trained? They were trained with a normal school. This is Wisconsin's first normal school down in Platteville. Now it's the dorms for the kids down there in Platteville, University of Wisconsin, Platteville. And the one for our area was, of course, right over here, the Vernon County Normal School. Now, of course, it's the museum, and a very fine one. Now, of course, a couple of years ago, a elevator even at the side there. Beautiful building. It was a Taj Mahal, they said, when it was built. And it cost $60,000, I believe, something in that area there. The middle floor, the 3 floors, the middle floor was a model school, and that's where teachers learned the craft of teaching. But even the first year, they were out amongst the other schools getting tutored by a master teacher, and they were helping the students and so forth. So almost all of the students, the teachers that I had, 5 of them, they all went to the Vernon County Normal School, including one of my wife's cousins. And they were out among those schools learning the craft, even in the first year. Now, around 1900, they would take a student who had done well in school, usually maybe 17, 18 years old, and she would be the teacher and often have her siblings as students. So they needed a little bit harder, a little harder. They needed a little bit more emphasis on teaching, so they had the normal schools. If a girl or boy had 1 year of high school, they could go to the normal school for 1 year. Then later it became 2 years. What's a daisy? Okay, the students there were going to be teachers. They did get a report card, and here's some report card here from 1951-52 there. And they would get a certificate. This one was good for 6 months of teaching. And then the school board would come out and interview these teachers. Now, Anime Klima Kraus, she told me that Bill Bernier, a neighbor of ours, and Mr. Ingham, they came up to Vernon County here. That was 1945. And they interviewed her, And their director told them, don't take anything less than $120. I think she was hired for $150. But the school board, they had a director and a treasurer and a clerk. And those three would run the school, if you will. It was interesting to read. I read many accounts of the teachers who practiced teaching in Crawford County. And one said that to get paid was harder than teaching, because she would have to go to the clerk to get a voucher, have to take it to the treasurer to be signed, then have to take it to the director to be signed again. So it was kind of hard for her to get paid. But one of the things that made the country schools successful is the teacher. The teacher was everything. If you had a good teacher, the school thrived. If you didn't have a so good one, the school suffered. And the young ladies, most of the young ladies, they knew how to work. They had a very strong work ethic. They came from families that usually were large families. Many times those families were taking care of mom and dad, as well as the girls' grandparents. They did all the normal things that you do on a farm. Most of them lived on farms. Very few came out of the cities there. And they took care of siblings. They learned how to wash, how to cook, how to sew, how to do the household things. They knew, Anna Mae Klemer told me that when she went through school up here, they taught her how to bank a fire. So in the morning, you would have coals then for a new day. She says, we all knew how to do that. We learned it on the farm. There's a modern school bus for you. They worked with pigs, sheep, cows, horses. They did farm work. So again, a very strong work ethic. This is an early corn sheller here. They were voracious readers. So many of them would go to libraries and get books. In my own school in Crawford County, the teacher would get school books from the public free library. They had a bookmobile. She'd bring about 20 or 30 books to school. And when she got those, she would read a paragraph for one or two. And then she would say, well, who wants this book? Well, the kid would raise their hand. By the end of the maybe 20 minutes, she had all 30 books distributed among the students. Now, when you look and see, well, why did they become school teachers? Well, one thing, there wasn't much else they could do. They could be a secretary, they could be clerical work, they could be a nurse, but teaching was open to any young lady. But most of them said, I love my teacher. I wanted to be like her. And so having a good teacher gave them an impetus to be a teacher themselves. Many of them had a mother who was a teacher. This is from the Saturday Evening Post, Norman Rockwell painting. So is that one. There's Anna Mae Klemer right here as a younger lady. She started teaching a few weeks after the bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945. And she taught there 3 years. Got married in 1948. But there's the salaries of teachers at Oak Grove. You can see they went way down in the 1930s because that was a depression. Nobody had any money. So when she left, I think she told me she was the highest paid teacher in Crawford County at $240, something of that sort. There she is today. She'll be 97 this spring here. At that time, men got more than women. And here is a man's contract. Here's a woman's contract. Everything is exactly the same, except he got paid $175 for the same number of days. She got $100. And the thinking was at that time that teaching was a second income. So the lady didn't need as much money. That was the mindset there. That wouldn't fly today. And you can see there was a separate line. Now, every year, at the end of the year, the teacher had to send a report, it's usually about 5 pages, to the town clerk. And then that was sent also to the county superintendent down at Prairie du Chien. So there was a separate line here for men teachers and women teachers. There's a substation there now. So where the teacher's desk, there sits a transformer, and where you pull the bell to ring the bell, there are wires. The curriculum was the Palmer method of writing. That was script, and you had those lines, you had the big chief tablet, and you had to keep writing the lines there and learn big A and little a, and capital A and small a, and so forth. When my older brothers went to school, they were using McGuffrey's readers. And McGuffrey was sold over 40 million of those books. When I went to school, 1948, it was Dick and Jane. And who was the sister? Sally. And the dog? Spot. And the cat? Oh, you know your Dick and Jane, don't you? Yeah. All right, who was the teddy bear? Wasn't that Tim? Wasn't Tim the teddy bear? I thought so. Okay. Yes, that series was put out by Zerna Sharp, and every 3 pages had a new word, and every story had roughly 5 new words. So there's a lot of repetition. Here's a strange one now. Here it looks like Dad's going to stay home and work at house, and the lady is going to go off to work. See. But one thing I learned too is strange is all the pictures. They showed Dick and Jane in sort of Sunday clothes, the kind of clothes that we would go to church with. See, they weren't the farm clothes that we were wearing. As a matter of fact, the clothes came out of Montgomery Ward. Whatever the Montgomery Ward had in their catalog, that's what they put in the books there. So we learned the Aesop fables and so forth. We learned about the readings. This one happened to be a story about Eddie Rickenbacker, the foremost ace in World War I. His plane was downed in the Pacific during World War II, and they had 7 or 8 men survive 21 days there. So you not only learn a little bit of history, you learn things like compassion and helpfulness, and, those corporal works of mercy that we should be familiar with. The teacher did have a Bible, so to speak. It told her, him or her, whatever they had to accomplish during that particular year, what the expectations were. We learned how to use a dictionary, and we learned how to parse. Later, I learned that was called diagramming sentences. I had one man teacher, that was Mr. Ray, for my 7th and 8th grade, and he taught sentences to how to diagram sentences. So we learned about nouns and verbs and adverbs and all of that. Here's a typical program for a teacher. This is what the teacher had every 10 minutes roughly. And this is what the students had every day in their grade level, grade 1, grade 2, and so forth. So often the teacher would start the day giving a little talk about things, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And you do the Pledge of Allegiance. She might read a little bit to the school and talk about upcoming things. And then there was recitation. So maybe the first graders would go up to the bench and they would recite for 10 minutes, and she would go over the lessons and so forth. And the beautiful thing about that is that if you were in, say, 4th grade, you reheard things from 1st and 2nd, so it's a review for you. If the 8th graders were up there, you didn't understand everything that was going on, but you kind of got a feel for what you were going to be learning in a couple of years. Walking to school, there's me and my younger brother, Bob. He had to stay home a year. He thought he could go to school with me there. And a typical thing that you would see, we see this now in our area up at Toma. We see this when we go to the south on a highway ridge on Highway A down there near Cashton and Lafarge and so forth. Amish walking to school. except they're all wearing their little uniforms, with the hat, many times barefoot, so forth. But we walked to school. Now, we walked a mile to school. Actually, we walked 5 miles to school, uphill both ways to 3 feet of snow. You might scoff at that, but here it is. See? Here's the Scheckel farm. We walked uphill through snow, and there's the school. And we walked home 5 miles through snow. I know it's a stretch. We went past 3 farms, this being the Ingham farm on Oak Grove Ridge. I have in the book a story about bees that congregated onto a fence post and how it really scared us and what we did about it. Our Big Chief tablet. I put this on the front of the book because this is so typical of the one-room school, walking across fields with little girls here together talking, the boys over here talking to their lunch pails, and others congregating in the yard there. This is from Saturday Evening Post. The photographer would come out and take pictures. And so we had the photographer come out most every year and take pictures of our schoolmates there. This is Mrs. Ray, my 4th and 5th grade teacher. And that good looking guy right there, that's me. Okay. Is this Diane?
No,
No? Okay. All right. Maybe you're not in this one.
I think that's Rita, and then the right behind her is Kathy, I think.
Yeah, that's right. My other favorite sisters.
And then
Yes.
Bob is over to the left more.
Yeah, Bob is over right there. Yeah, Philip, right there. I had nine kids in the Scheckel family. There's my 3rd and 4th grade teacher. This is Rosemary Scheckel. Well, in 1952, we had an election. We had the teacher talked about who was running and put their names on the board, and we voted around noontime. She had a ballot box up there and so forth. And right before school ended, she had an 8th grader go up and did some markings on the board. The ballots were brought out, and Eisenhower won 27-1. And so we had to figure out who was that dirty, rotten skunk who voted for Stevenson, and it was Jimmy Kazelka. And so we asked Jimmy, "Why'd you vote for Stevenson?" He said, "I just had to be different." He was different. He was the one that would take a worm around when girls were around and put it in his mouth and eat it. That was Jimmy. He was the one that came up to the Scheckel farm. This because Kazelkas lived about a quarter mile away. He was one that come up and well, he urinated on the electric fence. So he did that once, only once. School lunch. Everybody took their own school lunch. This is my school box from 3rd and 4th grade or so until the little hinges came off. And when we were on the farm, we didn't have television, but we had radio. So we'd listen to Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and Gene Autry and Hopalong Cassidy, Sky King, Sergeant Preston of the North, those kinds of westerns. And Roy Rogers was one of my favorite, and because he had a horse named, what was his horse?
Trigger.
Trigger, yes. And Dale Evans' horse was Buttermilk, yeah. And the Jeep was
Nellie Bell.
Nellie Bell, very good. The dog was
Bullet.
Bullet, very good, right? And then Pat Brady was the comical sidekick there, and he was actually in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, and came back and joined the Roy Rogers. So there's my report card from the 1st grade. This is right here, and you take that home, and then the parents would sign it, and the teacher would put a little thing up there and write something like that. My brother Philip, Bob, and myself right here. And there's part of the report that the teacher had to send in, and it had to list everybody in the school district from ages 4 to 20. So even if they weren't in school, they had to be on there. And matter of fact, here's the Scheckel family from 1947, 1948 there. The little ones here didn't even start school. So And the school was closed in 1962, and then it was sold to various people. Some people from Milwaukee owned it for a while. And I'm told that somebody from the Eastman area owned it for a while, and he had a boat he would just put out here, and he'd sit in that boat and drink beer. Well, that's okay. 2 sets of twins here, the Lucys and Rosenbaums. Some of the boys there. I got out of there with a diploma. Reed School up in Clark County is a state historical society place, and it's a nice place to visit. The 3 big social events in any one-room schools were the basket social, sometimes called box social, in which you would have a band come in and be 2 or 3 people playing maybe an accordion or a fiddle, and you'd have move the desk across, and they'd have a dance, and then every woman would bring a box with food in it, and then they would be auctioned off. And so they usually went for like $3, $4 and so forth. But the teacher could use that money for extra things if they needed. The Christmas program was big. And when Philip was in 8th grade and I was in 7th grade, we didn't want to do anything. Mr. Ray says, you will do something. So we sang Home on the Range. Playground games, Maple, softball was big. Everybody played softball, even the little ones there. You divide up by class and so forth. And you could play in noontime, you could play maybe 3 or 4 innings there. Sometimes the teacher would come out and they would help play a little bit, but it gave the teacher a rest too, because she was with kids all day there. And Mr. Ray, he could hit the ball from a good distance. Mrs. Ray, his wife, she couldn't hit the ball hardly at all, and she couldn't run. So they had a replacement runner for her if she did hit the ball. Okay. The woodshed was the backstop. And we had snowball fights, forts. We'd build snow forts and have snowball fights. And that was a lot of fun too. Can't do that these days. Somebody might get hurt, you know. Every boy carried a jackknife. You didn't do anything with it, but you carried one. And you played Annie over. Annie over means some kids would be on this side, some on the other. You throw the ball over. Somebody would put it behind their back, and then you'd run around and try to tag as many as you could. They'd be on your side. So Annie over was a big one. Discipline, not too much problem with discipline. Bill Rosenbaum swore one time, so the teacher had him wash his mouth out with soap, real soap. Can't do that these days either. That's a poor girl. In our school, my brother Philip probably was the one that had to write on the board the most time, very affable lad. He would talk to anybody about anything, anytime. I got in trouble once in a while. One time I had Mary Lou Rosenbaum sat in front of me, and she had pigtails that came down over my desk. 2 yellow pigtails right where the inkwell was. Okay, so the Scheckels got 1 row of crayons, your regular 8 colors. That was it. Mary Lou Rosenbaum came back from Christmas with a box of either 24 or 36. It even had a sharpener on it, see? And she turned around and she says, Lawrence, do you have blue-brown? No, Mary Lou, I don't have blue-brown. Pretty soon she'd turn around again. She says, do you have dandelion? No, Mary Lou, I don't have dandelion. She'd turn around 3 or 4 minutes later and she'd say, oh, do you have burnt gray? No, you little snot, I don't have burnt gray, see? That's when I pulled her pigtail, see? Just one, I only pulled 1 pigtail, but the teacher caught me, so I had to stay in. Anybody remember Wisconsin School of the Air? There were 10 programs covering the state there, and we had a radio up in front there, the old local radio, that only teacher touched that radio. But I remember 4 of them. Journeys in Music Land, which we call Let's Sing, Ranger Mac, Let's Write, and Let's Draw. Those were the 4 that I remember the most. Ranger Mac actually came to Toma, taught at Toma for a little bit, and came on at Monday mornings at 9:30, 15 minutes, and had a very unique sound to it, like For example, James Earl Ray has a unique voice that you could recognize. See, and so does Willie Nelson. He had a unique voice. And the teacher got a manual that told what every program would be for the year. And then you were advised to have a Ranger Mac corner, conservation corner. Journeys in Music Land was very popular. We had a book for every 2 students, and you would learn a new song every time, and then you sang old favorites. But he also talked about what a note was, a chord. He talked about some famous composers, so it was very nice that way. Journeys in Music Land. Pop Gordon. Then there was Let's Draw in Schwazbach. We had big sheets of butcher paper from Hansel's locker in Seneca there, so we could draw a letter. He came on, he would describe a scene, you know, could be from maybe out west or a sailing scene. And he'd say, now, boys and girls, put your head down on your desk and draw what you see. Philip and I looked at each other, we didn't see anything, not a thing. So, but we got through it. Agnes Rosenbaum, Mrs. Ray would hold up Agnes Rosenbaum. Says, now, boys and girls, if you only put your mind to it, you could draw like this too. Okay. Right. Then there was Let's Write. She came from La Crosse up here. W. La Crosse. And up north, they didn't have electricity. We didn't have electricity going down our ridge until 1941. Fortunately, if they had done it that year, it would have been 4 or 5 years later because they didn't use they didn't do electrification during World War II. The materials were not available. So they would send paper, they'd send new records up to the North Country up there. Now, the thing that made a Wisconsin School of the Air a success is that they focused on the needs using technology. And almost every one of them were interactive. In Let's Draw, you were drawing. In Let's Sing, you were singing. So, and so you were really involved with the radio program. Now, the decline of the Wisconsin School of the Air was the consolidation. That's what caused it. Schools, one country schools were all closing in the 50s and the 60s. The school nurse came out ever so often. There was a tall, willowy person from Seneca, and Catherine Lynch was our school nurse. We knew when she was coming, and she would check things, and she would talk to us about sanitation and brushing your teeth. In 1956, this came out. Mr. Carberry brought these permission slips out for the polio vaccine. That was a biggie because polio was very much feared in the 1950s, as was tuberculosis. We had goiter pills, and they were really good. They were sugar coated. They tasted good. We tried to steal a few now and then. But all the teacher had to do is show some pictures like this. That would induce us to take the goiter pills. And of course, goiter caused by lack of iodine, and most of the foods that we use were grown locally, so you didn't get enough iodine. Then they came out iodized salt, so you didn't have to take the goiter pills anymore. They were passed out 2 to a person on Friday. She checked for ringworm, and my brother Philip had a little bit of ringworm. Up in the North Country here, the winter weather kills it most of the time. She would check for scoliosis. She would talk about the food groups. And she came out one time and she talked about posture. So we all put our book on top of our bed and we walked around the room, like this, as if you're going to walk like that, see. And of course, some of us didn't take it too seriously. We would knock the book off in front of us, and she gave up after about a minute or 2. But we got the picture what we're supposed to have. Consolidation was very bitter. Closing those one-room schools did not come easy. Now, the 1939 law said that if a school did not have an evaluation of more than $10,000 or more than 10 students, that school had to close. And they were given an incentive to close, but most schools ignored it. The big law that made the big difference is 1947. In 1947, they came out with a law that said that every rural school and every red dot here is a one-room country school, 115 in Crawford County. They had to belong to one of the 6 districts, the high school districts in the county. And they were appointed 6-person committee. This county superintendent was the 7th person who couldn't vote. And then they determined which district you were going to be in. And it was bitter because then the people didn't have a direct say. They were at the mercy of this committee. And this is the plat book right now. This is the Seneca School District right here. But if you wanted to belong to Seneca rather than your farm here belonged to Gaze Mills, your land had to be contiguous with Seneca District. So what some farmers would do is they would buy 100 feet of land connecting this one to this one, like right here. See, now they were contiguous, see, and they could belong to Seneca District. So now today, here in 2022, if you look at the Seneca District, here's the boundaries right here. These right here are all contiguous with Seneca right here. And you have DeSoto over here and North Crawford and Kickapoo here and Zika down here. But if you're along this road, which is Highway 27, at say 7 in the morning, 3 school buses from 3 different districts go on that road. And well, that's what happened with consolidation. So there are a lot of arguments to not consolidate. One being that the location was isolated. Very few trials and tribulations and temptations there. The teacher and the students pretty much ran the school. If the teacher found that there was an especially exciting thing going on, she could let that go another 5 or 10 minutes. She didn't have to belong to the kind of bell. The teachers often played with the students at recess. You learned to work independently because you were on your own pretty much. The students helped each other an awful lot. You could listen in on other classes, learn ahead. And a teacher, if she had a student who was, say, a little bit ahead of the others, she would put them with an upper grade for some activities there. Now, it was kind of like a big family. Yes, there were quarrels and spats and so forth, but they have that in families. But the students all came from the farm. They were all poor, but didn't know they were poor. They came from large families usually. In the 28 students on our ridge, you had the Scheckels, the Kazakas, the Rosenbaums, the Burdettes, and the Mayhans, and that was pretty much a school. Any social functions. And about that time, in the 1940s and 50s, farmers were doing thrashing together. They were cutting wood together. They were doing butchering together. And so there was a lot of that interaction among farmers. When the schools closed, they didn't have that anymore. So you didn't have your big 3, your box social, your Christmas program, and the end of your picnic there. So they had these informational meetings which ran around the state. And they had people coming out from this Wisconsin Department of Instruction trying to convince schools to close and join the bigger ones and so forth. There was a lot of opposition. Here's a typical parent reaction to that. Now, the proponents of consolidation, they had their points. They promised this and this and this and that. And the taxes actually didn't go down. They went up in most cases. Okay. Kind of like, I'm here for the government, I'm here to help you. There were social differences too. This is a view, typical view of the farm kids. City kids are lazy, have too many things to do not work as a family. And so when our family went to Seneca, which was 115 people, everybody was there. We'd see these classmates from Seneca there that were in our church. They're sitting on stools doing nothing. Oh, they're lazy, see? And the view, on the other hand, those country kids, we have to put up with that mix. So there was that social difference there. Country school kids are feeling an inferiority, second class, difficult in social situations. And I kind of felt that too when I went to high school, later, and so forth. I kind of feel like you're second class in many respects. But there were other forces too. Transportation. In the early days, the roads were muddy. They were rutted, frozen, and often you would get stuck. Farmers would change. Farms were getting bigger and fewer, and farm kids were not living on the farm. So farming was going from horses to tractors. So not only did you have declining enrollments, you had larger farms, fewer and fewer farm kids. And in my own family, there's my great-grandmother and great-grandparents that came from Luxembourg, settled in Iowa in the 1850s. And they had 4 children. 3 of them died, 2 of them on the same day of diphtheria. They moved south and had 10 more children. One of their children they had was my grandfather, right here. He had 16 children, and one of those was my father. And my mother and father got married in 1931 and had 9 children. That good-looking one, that's right there. Okay. And there's still 8 of us still around there. And this is the last time that all of us were together as a children, Scheckel children there. And my wife and I had 3 children. And one of them right here has 2 children. So you're going from 16 to 9 to 3 to 2. And that's what's happening all over. Then you had Sputnik in the same day that the Milwaukee Braves actually were playing the Yankees in October of 1957. The Russians put up Sputnik. So now there was this fear, well, maybe our schools aren't good enough. Maybe we need more. So there was that feeling there. It was hard to find good teachers. They could go to the city schools and make a little bit more money. Then there was the end of the year picnic. So they had the races for the kids, and the boys and young men played softball. The women did all the work, and the older men talked about farming and so forth. We had a little graduation there. Now this is the Reed School that I talked about in Clark County. Worth visiting there. It's 3 miles east of Neilsville. You go 3 miles the other way and you come to high ground, which is worth visiting also. They give programs up there. In Wisconsin, 4th graders are learning local history. So they have a lot of 4th graders there that go with the programs there. And we belong to the Wisconsin Society of Schools of America there. And there's our 8th grade graduation picture. That's me, whoops, a daisy, right there. And our teacher, Mr. Ray, who died very young in his early 30s. And very poignant there. So I put that in the book too, so you can look and see who is who is. Okay. The Amish still have their one-room schools up there where we live, south of town there. And this is graduation day in late April when they were gathering for their final day there. The one-room school was so important in Iowa that Grant Wood's painting here was put on their coin. The 2004 quarter. When beautiful school days are over and grown men and women are weak, though gone, we will think of them ever, will bring back my school days to me. We long for our playmates of childhood who played with us day after day, and little we dreamt how we loved them until they have gone away. Oh, beautiful, beautiful school days. Oh, could your sweet memory remain through all of our pleasures and sorrows and bring back our school days again. And a school which was in better shape at that time. Many of them turned into granaries. Some of them were left on site, some tore down, some went to county parks, museums. This is one of my favorites right here. This is from Bill Keene's cartoon. It was published a couple of months ago, but it was also published like 15, 20 years ago. And they come across this school, this old school here, an old abandoned one little school. Billy says, wonder whatever became of those poor little kids who had to go to school here. They did all right, didn't they? They did okay. Well, we have some other books, the murder book about Claire Olson, and this book about growing up on that farm there in Crawford County there. A history book, another history book, another, oh, there's a science book, sorry. Science books there, and they're back there if you wish to look at them. Okay, and this one right here, that's what we're talking about here, so we thank you. And she's my dear wife, she couldn't come today because she's not feeling too good. Okay, so now I'll entertain any questions or comments that you have. Questions, comments, snide remarks? I take them all.
Excellent presentation.
Well, thank you, okay. Yeah. Yes,
You said you researched your school somewhere, did you say basketball?
Platteville.
Platteville.
The records all went to Platteville, to the research center down there.
Are there other school records?
Oh, yes,
there?
there's other school records out there.
Okay.
It's they have a research room there called Southwest something there.
Mhm.
And you can get it online, you can look at it online, and you can go down there. Now, the records that I got from there, I went down there for a day, and I scanned most of them. I took a scanner with me and with my
So
computer.
you could go online and see what schools they have, you think?
Yes, you can.
Okay,
And if you call them up, they're very helpful. They'll
Okay.
they'll talk to you about
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah. Any others?
Is that at the university?
It's at the university, yeah. Mhm, right. Yeah.
I'm curious to wonder why they moved in Platteville.
I don't know of why they did that. I went down to Pardashina, I went to the clerk of records and the county clerk and asked what they did with them. And they said whatever they had at one time, they sent down to Platteville, University of Wisconsin, Platteville.
oh, would that just be Crawford County then? No,
That Platteville, that's in Grant County.
I think that-
Yeah.
But would they have Vernon County records there? do you think?
That I don't know, but the first place I would check is right over here at the museum.
Museum.
That's what they have there, yeah. Yeah, I got, I spent some time over there looking at, especially learning about the Vernon County normal school. And things there, went through all their books they have there. Yes, Roger.
Yeah, I don't think you can emphasize enough the learning that a younger child would get by tuning into the older grades.
Mhm.
I mean, I answered questions on our aptitude test when we got to junior high or high school.
Mhm.
That well, I wasn't supposed to know yet.
Yeah.
They always have square roots and so forth.
Mhm. Yes.
And I would dare say that there were six in my class in west of here at Davis School,
Mhm.
6th and 9th grade. And when we got into the Viroqua system, 5 of us in high school were National Honor Society out of the
Yeah.
6.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's what I found when I was doing a lot of research is that the country school kids were a little bit ahead of their city cousins.
Yeah, we maybe didn't know how to dribble a basketball, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, the city kids, when I say city, Seneca, you know, that, to me, that was a big city at the time,
yeah.
when I was growing up. But those kids, they didn't know how to skin a squirrel, or set a fence post, or butcher a calf, a cow. They didn't know how to do that. We did, we knew how to do that, so. So we had skills that they didn't have and vice versa. Yeah, that was a big part of the learning thing. I remember I went to, I was in 9th grade, and Mrs. Turk was our English teacher at Seneca there. And she says, today we're going to diagram sentences. Well, I never heard of that. So she started out doing, at the grade school, we call that parsing. It's called parsing. So we learned that in 8th grade. And now we're relearning it. Well, other kids that didn't go to a country school, they had never done that. So we were ahead in that respect. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, again, thank you for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here today.